All right, let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining us this morning. I'm Lanae Erickson. I am a Senior Vice President at Third Way and a now frequent host of Zoom events. So we're excited to have this conversation today, even though it's on a little bit of a tough topic. So between the continuing pandemic, the supply chain issues, possible war in Europe, there's a lot going on at the moment. And it seems to me it's a little hard to predict what will happen a few days from now, let alone further out than that. So I think most folks can be forgiven for not spending a ton of time thinking about what might happen at the end of June, but it is coming and it is likely to be pretty earth-shattering when it does. And we're predicting to see the Supreme Court for the first time in history actively take away a constitutional right from the American people. And we know that a lot of deep red states are going to be very, very difficult in the post-Roe worlds that we may anticipate. Many of them have trigger laws in place that will go into place immediately once Roe is either weakened or overturned. But the impacts of the Supreme Court decision are going to extend far beyond deep red states. So we've got two fantastic leaders with us today to talk about how we think this is going to play out in more purple battleground states. We are joined today by Nevada Attorney General Aaron Ford and Ben Jordan, who is a state senator in Georgia and a candidate for Attorney General. And we want to just have a conversation about what things are going to look like on the ground if and when we do see this Supreme Court decision that we anticipate. So let's get started. And I want to start with you, AG Ford. Can you just talk about kind of the status quo? What does the situation look like right now in a place like Nevada for women seeking an abortion? We know Roe versus Wade is currently still in place and has been for decades. How is that working for women in your state as we see it right now?
Well, first off, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to apologize at the outset. I just realized I'm still drinking out of a Christmas cup. So it's but it's a big cup and I need a big cup of coffee. So especially with these early morning Zoom sessions. Thank you so much for having me. Jen, great to see you as well. To your question though, it's I'm proud of our state of Nevada. We clearly are going to stand hand in hand with our counterparts, other attorneys general and others across the nation as we see Roe v. Wade come under attack. But here in Nevada, abortion is legal and is easily accessible. And an abortion care may be provided within 24 weeks after the commencement of any pregnancy. And I'm proud again that I say we actually created an additional protections for reproductive rights in 1973, the same year as the landmark Roe v. Wade decision, by adding an affirmative right to choose into our state law. In 1990, we actually passed an initiative that will require another initiative essentially to remove the codified Roe v. Wade protections from our state laws. And this law, so therefore, is going to remain in effect even if Roe v. Wade is overturned. So additionally, in 2019, I'm proud to say that our Governor Sisolak, signed into law several provisions of existing abortion laws, including the decriminalization of performing an abortion, removing informed consent laws, and removing other barriers to access an abortion. And then there was another state Senate bill in the same year, 2019, that allocated $6 million to be spent statewide for grants to family planning organizations. Before I was Attorney General, I was in the state Senate, and I'm proud to have worked with so many of my colleagues to ensure that we continue to undergird this important constitutional right. And so we'll be in a good position to continue to protect that right should Roe v. Wade be overturned.
Senator Jordan, I suspect that the reality on the ground might look a little bit different in the current moment in Georgia. What do things look like from your perspective right now before we get to what the Supreme Court impacts might be?
Yeah, I think that with respect to what General Ford was talking about, I think it kind of underscores where we're headed in terms of kind of, a tale of two cities, a tale of two states. While Nevada has been very aggressive or proactive with respect to protecting women's rights and women's access to health care. Georgia's been completely different. And so when you see a situation where Roe v. Wade is likely to be overturned or at least pulled back, where we're going to see a devolution of these decisions to the states, right? It is going to be such a patchwork in terms of some states are going to be protective of women, and then some states like Georgia are not. In terms of what's happening on the ground here, we already banned abortion effectively at 6 weeks in 2019, but there have been further efforts this session where there has been a bill dropped to basically highly regulate and effectively ban abortions by way of medications. And I think that was probably triggered by some of the decisions that the Biden administration made with respect to that. And so we're going back through the fight again. And so, you know, I'm kind of telling my brethren, I'm like, well, you've already banned it. You got to ban it, you know, but that is where they are. And so for women in Georgia, I mean, it's a really scary time, but probably the only light out there is that there are states that are protective of women's rights, like Nevada and like others, that maybe access will be available, but of course, as we know, access will only be available to women of means who can travel to a different state and access abortion care.
So, Attorney General Ford, I'm curious what your role is going to be in this potential post-Roe world when you look out at you know, being the top law enforcement officer in the state and working with other attorneys general who might be in a different position. How are you going to approach these issues and have an impact and work with potentially, you know, other attorneys general across other states that might not be as protective as Nevada is?
Well, listen, that's a great question. And, you know, it speaks to the importance, frankly, of elected leadership. What Senator Jordan just talked about, the tale of two states, is no more pronounced than as the evidence between Nevada and Georgia, or Nevada and Texas, or Nevada and some other states across the country. And, you know, frankly, we've seen what happens when a change of elected official happens. Virginia is the prime example. We've seen the newly elected Republican leadership in Virginia, for example, the state and the Attorney General in particular has joined the nationwide effort to overturn federal abortion law. His predecessor, my colleague, was on the other side of that fight with me, seeking to protect that particular right. Now, here in Nevada, we've seen actually that my immediate past predecessor, who's now running for a different office, he likewise joined efforts to undermine the right to choose, even though our state protects it. He was signing on the briefs to try to undermine it at the national level, even though his constituency, even though the residents of his own state had that right embedded within our laws. And so, you know, my role is to continue to fight for that law and to protect that constitutional law and that constitutional right. With Democratic leadership in this state, you know, the protections around abortion care and access to it would likely remain the same. But as I've just indicated, in the event of a change in party leadership at the state level, it's certainly permissible, if not expectable, that abortion rights could be undermined, albeit not in our state, but in others.
And Senator Jordan, I know you're seeking to be the top law enforcement official in the state of Georgia, but then you would have some other political dynamics at play, obviously with some leadership that is more hostile, likely in other positions across the state. How would you think about navigating that and leveraging the power that you might have either in your current position or in the position you're seeking?
So I think specifically in Georgia, and you know, all the AGs have different powers in the state. Specifically in Georgia, it's not necessarily law enforcement as much as it's kind of the top lawyer, the top legal official in the state. And one of the functions of the Attorney General in Georgia is to issue official opinions that are supposed to guide members of the General Assembly, members of the executive branch in terms of what they do or what's expected. And of course, there's an impact then on state decisions, let me say state court decisions as well, when you're talking about an attorney general opinion. So specifically in Georgia, we had HB 481, which is the bill that was passed. It's law. It's been stopped in the appellate thing that bans abortions at 6 weeks, right? So with respect to that, if Roe v. Wade is overturned in June, that will then, of course, free the way for the 11th Circuit to uphold HB 481, and then it could arguably go into effect at that point in time. If I'm Attorney General on day one, I'll issue an opinion that basically says that that law cannot go into effect until it's been re-ratified by the General Assembly here, because that's the law in Georgia. If a law is unconstitutional at the time that it is passed, but at some point in time becomes constitutional or could be perceived as constitutional or argued, it has to go all the way back through the legislative process. And of course, as we know politically, as Democrats in Georgia make just even small gains in the House, I mean, that bill barely passed the Georgia House. I think it was by 2 votes. And so you can see that if we've been able to make some gains in the House or the Senate, that there is a really good chance that it could not be re-ratified in terms of the General Assembly. And then, of course, if we elect Stacey Abrams as governor, as a Democratic governor, she has the opportunity to then veto it. So sometimes it's about using your power in a way that's kind of soft power, but ultimately, it really could make a difference in terms of whether or not this law actually goes into effect after the Supreme Court issues a decision.
Interesting. And as a member right now of the state Senate, do you think that the dynamics, the political dynamics or the discussion in the legislature would be different if you're talking about a real law that would be, about to be enforced, as opposed to kind of an abstraction like it may have been, last time around?
Absolutely. I mean, I think behind the scenes, you would have even business interests or lobbyists or even other Republican electeds who were kind of like, what's the big deal? It's going to get stopped. We're doing this basically for political reasons. Now there are true believers, let's be clear. There's like the true believers, but then there are the people that are doing this just for political reasons. If the Supreme Court reverses Roe and it becomes very, very real, what the implications of that will be, not only for women, but also for healthcare providers in this state, residency programs, right? Like training OBGYNs on the ground here. We have some of the best medical schools. And so you're going to tell me we can't even train doctors to do what they're supposed to do because it's against the law. It's one of those where you really start to look at the implications even beyond, the fact that women won't have autonomy or can make decisions over their lives. That then you kind of start to say, well, maybe this isn't the best idea.
So, General Ford, I'm curious what you feel like the politics of all of this looks like in a place like Nevada, because obviously you have a big Senate seat on the line in 2022 that could decide the majority. Actually, that's true in both of your states. You have some really key House races. You've got, obviously a whole bunch of state ledge races that are going to be super important here. Do you think that this is going to be an issue that voters are talking about in the coming months? We know that the election talk will obviously ramp up throughout the summer, and that'll be right after we see this decision. How do you think it's going to play in Nevada on the ground?
Yeah, so the short answer is it's absolutely going to cause additional conversation. It's going to be the forefront of the minds of voters here in our state. I can't quote you the exact percentage, but a vast majority of Nevadans support this constitutional right to abortions and to healthcare here in Nevada. I mean, so it's something that certainly people are paying attention to. As I've indicated, a change in party leadership can absolutely lead to the undermining of the right, not the eradication. I want to be clear, right? Because our stuff is protected in our state constitution. It's going to require a vote of the people to get it undone. But that does not stop an attorney general who is not of this particular persuasion from coming in and filing briefs in other places that's undermining the right in other places. And that could lead to, as Jen indicated, Jen, as Senator Jordan indicated, we're cool. I can call you Jen. You can call me Aaron. Jen. I don't care about that. That people will be traveling to Nevada. People with the ability to travel, right? Those who have the funds in order to be able to do it, and we know, where their burden is going, how their burden is going to shake out. But the point is, absolutely, the politics, our political system here is going to be paying attention to what's happening at the Supreme Court level. I think the conversation is going to see a great uptick after the summer decision comes out. And make no mistake about it, those on the other side of the aisle here in our state will do whatever they can to undermine the right, even though, again, here in our state, we have that right. They don't care. They want to do whatever they can to undermine it, and they will work to do that.
Yeah, I'm curious if after Texas passed its absolutely extreme law, whether you all saw an uptick in folks traveling from that state. I know I talked to some colleagues in Colorado who were saying that Coloradans were having a hard time getting appointments because Texans were coming to Colorado in such great numbers. There were so many people in Texas that they were kind of overwhelming the system of states that were nearby. Have you seen those impacts yet, or is that kind of to come as we get further down the line?
Well, I know that some of the community groups that work in this arena have indicated that there was some uptick in abortion services being provided to folks from Texas. I don't know what that number is. I don't know how expansive it has been, but frankly, having to travel, one is too many. They shouldn't have to leave the home state of Texas in order to exercise the constitutional right that that Roe v. Wade provides. And so, we need to continue to push back on this notion at every level that we can. Whether it's 1 or 1,000 individuals coming from Texas into Nevada, it's too many.
Senator Jordan, can you walk us through what this would actually look like if you are a woman in Georgia that needs or wants to have an abortion service that is not allowed under the state law? What are you actually going to do? What is that process going to look like for women in your state?
I mean, it's going to be awful. I mean, it's one of those things where Georgia already has one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country, 20 weeks, and then all of the barriers they kind of put up in terms of, the right to know laws, and you have to get an ultrasound, and you got to do this, you got to do that, and there's a waiting period, and all these things that are already in place here that make it incredibly difficult to get an abortion here in Georgia. And so if you're going to even take away that, it's one of those things where I think it's almost going to be impossible, because if you're talking about 6 weeks, most women don't know they're pregnant. And the only women who do are women who are wanting to have children, right? You're at that point in time where you are tracking and your temperature and all that kind of stuff, ovulation, and you're just eagle-eyed on it. But women who aren't, wanting to have a child, they're not thinking, well, it's 6 weeks. Oh man, I better make sure. So it's effectively gonna make it where women cannot get abortion care in Georgia. And they are going to have to go over state lines. Our problem is that we're surrounded by states that they don't provide abortion. I mean, they've got the same type of bans that we do. So that's really concerning, especially when you're talking about women who don't have means, don't have access to health care or OBGYNs or doctors as it is. We're going to basically cut off, the only line they really have when it comes to this. And again, if you have means, you can fly to Nevada, right? You can go to Illinois. But the vast majority of women in this state, they don't have that. And it's all going to be really kind of stripped away from them.
So I see that we have questions starting to pop up in the chat. Please, if you do have questions, feel free to put them down there and I will pepper them into our experts as we go along. And the first one is about this idea of folks having to travel somewhere else and then coming back home. Are there things that then the red state politicians or the people of those states could do to folks who have sought abortion services once they come back? What is that going to look like? You know, say you do have the means to go to Nevada and then you know, come back to Georgia. What is that going to look like for you? And are there going to be implications once you get back?
I think the most concerning thing about HB 481 that we don't talk about is there are personhood elements to it. Effectively, it's not just banning abortion, but now it's basically making a fertilized egg a person under Georgia law throughout the code. And so you could see, and this was part of the debate, someone pursuing a woman for murder, manslaughter, whatever it is, under state law, not even about abortions or about healthcare or anything like that, but just kind of, you know, statutes around even child abuse, right? And using those laws in a way to aggressively go after women who are just seeking, you know, care, you know, even in other states. And I think that is the real danger here and kind of where the Pandora's box has been opened, because it's one thing in terms of if you want to talk about, you know, Roe v. Wade and is that a good construct or not, but when you inject personhood into these laws and say that a fertilized egg has all the rights that any other human being who is walking around and breathing does, that is incredibly concerning in terms of the implications that it could have for women, especially in the hands of a prosecutor who has an agenda with respect to these things.
Yeah, I mean, that is so extreme that the people of Mississippi voted it down when they had the opportunity to put it in place. So, and yet your state legislature keeps moving forward with it.
Now, I just want to say what Jen just highlighted is the perfect example of why we have to stay vigilant in our protection of this particular right, because I'll say this, people are savvy when it comes to attacking this right. And this question of personhood, as she's just indicated, you know, frankly, I wouldn't have been able to respond to your question without having to like do some deep thinking around it, because in Nevada, we're not concerned about that, right? But Jen, coming from a state that is a little more active in undermining the right, I hate to say it that way, she's able to demonstrate how savvy people can be in order to attack it. And we have to stay vigilant on it. And we have to recognize when they're trying to find, I use the phrase, more than one way to skin a cat. When they're trying to find another way to skin the cat, we have to be very cognizant of that and be able to respond.
Yeah, and I see in the chat, one of our audience members just said that that personhood would also potentially outlaw lots of forms of birth control that people use, including the most effective forms, like, you know, IUDs and other kinds of birth control that folks could say are making a fertilized egg non-implant. So, and fertility treatments and, you know, all kinds of other things.
Right.
The consequences are really staggering if you play them all the way out.
Well, if you think about kind of Roe v. Wade and kind of where it came from and the basis from it, I mean, it starts with Griswold versus Connecticut, right? When we talk about the right of a woman to be able to access contraception. I mean, that's where we started to see kind of the penumbra of rights kind of start with respect to privacy. And so if you kind of take away Roe v. Wade and say women don't have this right doesn't exist, then that effectively, you know, it kind of brings the whole house down. And so folks aren't thinking about contraception. They're not thinking about birth control and access to IUDs, whatever it is. They're just thinking about kind of this abortion debate. But the problem is that the foundation that Roe is built on, it really is about women's autonomy and ability to make decisions about when they're going to have children and how they're going to have children. And that goes all the way down to even contraception and their ability to take the birth control pill. And so again, it's like the implications here are so wide ranging that I don't think folks have actually taken the time to step back and say, okay, if we did do this, what would it look like and how would it impact women on an everyday basis?
And some might respond that what you're talking about are extreme examples of what could happen, right? But we can't dismiss it as such. We can't dismiss it as such because we know that they will take the door that has been opened through this undermining of the right to pursue the next level of restrictions. They've demonstrated it not necessarily in this particular context, but in other contexts as well. So we, again, have to stay vigilant in fighting this right and fighting it tooth and nail.
And Attorney General Ford, I know you've painted a pretty rosy picture of your home state when it comes to this, making us all want to go hang out in Nevada. But one question I have is, are these extreme elements that are pushing things in Georgia and Texas and other places, do they exist in Nevada as well, or are you dealing with some kind of nicer, more moderate version of of the Republican Party where you're at?
No, sure. Listen, I'm proud of my state. Like, as I've indicated, I can't give you the percentage, the upper 70s, I would say, of us in this state protect and respect the constitutional right to an abortion. But you have a handful of folks who do not, and some are in fact moderate, but some are absolutely extreme. I mean, we're not immune to the extreme views of people from the other party in this state. I mean, they're quite prevalent in other areas, but for this particular right, I am happy to be able to say that the vast majority of our Nevadans support the right and will absolutely push back, Democrat or Republican, against either party who endeavors to undermine it. But what I've said is that doesn't stop individuals who are elected in positions of power from trying to undermine it. They remain emboldened to do it. How do I know? Because the immediate past Attorney General did it by signing on briefs to undermine the right in other states. Right. Period, point blank. That's what he did, right? And I was in the legislature just like Jen was, and I saw legislators who came from more conservative parts of the state who did push for more extreme restrictions on this right. They never got a hearing because we have a Democratic trifecta right now. Back then we didn't necessarily have a trifecta, but we had enough sensibility in our houses and in the governor's mansion to stop that effort. So yes, I'm very proud of where we are in the state on this particular issue. But no, we're not immune from the extreme views on trying to undermine the right at any cost.
So I see that Alice Olstein of Politico just posed a question in the chat, which I'll read to you all. Republican lawmakers in Arizona, West Virginia, and Florida are advancing bills that would create 15-week abortion bans. Do you have any read on why states are pursuing 15-week bans instead of Texas-style abortion bans? Although, Senator Jordan, you've made clear that your state would be siding with the more Texas side on that. Yeah,
so I think the reason they're doing that is because I think there's a thought that the Supreme Court is not going to completely upend Roe v. Wade, but they will pull back in terms of protections. So in terms of a 15-week ban, they're probably thinking that's a safe bet for them in terms of where they draw the line. And so that's my guess, because they think that ultimately, even after the court's decision in June, they're going to be in a pretty safe place, even if Roe v. Wade isn't completely overturned.
Well, two things that I've said already kind of speak to this question. First of which is there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? The 6-week ban, as Jen has indicated, maybe it doesn't survive at the Supreme Court level. But there's more than one way to negatively impact the constitutional right to an abortion, and that's by reducing it from its current status at the law to 15 weeks. They'll take what they can get, right? This goes back to what I said a minute ago about we cannot, we can't get comfortable in thinking that they won't go to this particular extreme, right? That opening up this box, person that we were talking about at that moment, won't lead to some other effort to undermine the right to an abortion. This is the prime example of why we cannot fall into that trap, because they will do anything that they can to nick away at the right. Because if they're able to stop it at 15, in 5, 8 years, whatever the case may be, then they're going to go for 12. Then they're going to go for 10. Then they're going to go for 6. Then they're going to go for outright. You know, they are patient with their attacks on the constitutional rights of everybody, frankly. But in this particular instance, we're talking about abortion. I get hyped thinking about it because they do the same thing in the voting rights context, where they undermine and undermine and undermine to the point to where the right is so undermined that it's almost non-existent. And so such is the case in the abortion context, and we need to be very cognizant of that fact as we move forward.
Well, and to Senator Jordan's point, the protections in Roe and the establishment of Roe was really underpinning all kinds of rights for Americans, whether, you know, no matter what their sexual orientation, gender, including a lot of the LGBT decisions that have been, LGBT equality decisions that have been made, you know, lots and lots of other things about bodily autonomy. So who knows where they could go next.
Yeah, 2 years ago, and I'll give you the mic back. 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I was giving a speech. I believe it was to Planned Parenthood, and I said, here's what we can expect. We can expect them to pass the most extreme versions of abortion restrictions at the state legislative level, because they want that extreme version to get to the Supreme Court. They know that, you know, they in their mind may know that it may not be upheld, but it gives the ability to the now, you know, right-leaning Supreme Court to take a bite out of it. Right, to start the undermining process. And that's what we're seeing here. So 6 weeks is up there now. If it falls out, 15 weeks is going to be the next, you know, order of business for them to have to consider, and they can take a bite out of this constitutional right.
I know we've been talking a lot about the state politics and the state laws around this issue, but there is something that the federal policymakers could do to make things easier and to codify Roe. Senator Jordan, can you talk a little bit about what you're hoping to see from you know, from democratically controlled House and Senate and the White House that might make things a little bit easier on the ground in terms of what happens if the Supreme Court undermines Roe?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if we were able to have some kind of codification at the federal level, that would be incredibly helpful. If for no other reason than when we talk about healthcare isn't just a stagnant thing, right? That in every state, it's like a widget. Healthcare is so, in the healthcare system in the United States, so intertwined, you know, over state lines. It is federal. And you can't just put it in a box. So it makes sense that you would have at the federal level some regulation with respect to it, just so healthcare providers, women would know exactly what they're dealing with, right? And that there can be some consistency, you know, all over the country. But, you know, honestly, as much as I wish that were going to happen, I think what we've seen with respect to the voting rights context, you know, where they can't really get that over the line in the Senate because of the rules in place and because of a couple of particular U.S. senators, I am not confident that if they can't get voting rights stuff over the line, that they're going to actually be able to protect women and get, you know, a codification of the protections of Roe over the line.
General Ford, have you had conversations with your federal policymaker counterparts in Nevada about this and see any window for progress?
Well, sure. I mean, our offices have had discussions around, you know, this constitutional right, voting rights, as Jen just indicated, and others. And what we've determined is that the best approach is a parallel track. Protect at the state level, do all that we can, and then hope at the federal level they can get something done. And if they cannot, then again, we need to be working as hard as we can in our respective states and with our respective states. You know, I look forward to having Jen as my colleague over there so she and I can sign a brief together on trying to figure out ways to protect the rights of Nevadans and Jordans and everybody in between. You know, it's tough. It's tough. I get it. And Jen is in the state Senate right now, fighting that battle. And I remember being in the state Senate fighting, maybe not this battle, but battles that can really drain you. And, you know, kudos to Jen for not being drained so much that she's just throwing the towel in because we can't. And these are the types of conversations that we've had, again, with our counterparts at the federal level, but also with my counterparts at the AG level in other states who are on the right side of the protection of this constitutional right.
And let me say, with respect to why I think that the voting rights bill should take precedence in some way, it is because I believe that people in this state, right, if they are allowed to vote, I think that a majority, I've seen some polling that shows 65 to 70% of voters in the state of Georgia support women's rights, right? And what that looks like, you know, there's a continuum, but they support like kind of the basic kind of idea that women should have the ability to have control over their bodies. And so my whole thing is, if we make voting easy, right, and we're not suppressing the vote or we're not subverting elections, that the people that get elected, they are going to reflect the values of the people in this state. And the people in this state value women, they value families, and they trust them. And so if we let folks vote and we make it easy and we actually count the votes, I think ultimately we're going to win at the ballot box. And that's, as we can see now in terms of the Supreme Court sending it back down to the state legislators, I think ultimately that's where the fight is going to be.
Yeah, preach, Jen. I mean, I've used the word savvy already. Those who are opposed to this right and others, frankly, are savvy. They know that undergirding every right is this right to vote. And they have restricted it such that you can't get the folks that Jen is talking about to the polls, right? Or it's hard for them to get to the polls, or they get discouraged because of the different barriers and obstacles that are put up. And so they are undermining this. That's one of the savvy approaches to attacking this constitutional right. It's inextricably intertwined with the right to vote, as are so many other rights. And so we have to continue, again, working diligently and be vigilant in protecting the women's right to choose, women's right to an abortion here, as well as the right to vote.
Well, it really puts a point on how important state and local elections are when you think about, you know, even just the fact that your predecessor, General Ford, was fighting to stop women in other states from being able to access the right that they have by your state law. So I hope that can remind people that voting in their state and local elections is as important, if not more so sometimes, than those at the top of the ticket.
And now he's trying to go to the U.S. Senate, by the way, to be one of the decision makers that Jen is talking about we need some federal help on, right? That can't happen. You don't want to replace Catherine Cortez Masto, a staunch pro-choice Democrat, with my predecessor, who has already shown his penchant for undermining women's rights. So keep that in mind as we move forward.
Well, I think that is as good a place as any to end this conversation. Hopefully we'll get folks motivated to be ready to go out and vote in November. And I thank you both so much for joining me for this conversation. And thank you everyone who participated. We look forward to working with all of you to continue to try to protect this right in every way we can.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
That's great.